All right, folks, thanks for joining us here at 40 Abraham Lincoln State Park. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes. Join us for again, enjoy the program. Let us know where you're watching from. And if you have questions, post those questions, and I'll be able to answer those questions either through the posts or at the end of our show, we'll have a kind of a question answer for those of you that are watching us on Facebook. But enjoy the show this evening. It's going to be a great evening here at the Slant Village at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. Make sure you share this with your friends and your family and your Facebook page. Get all those folks watching, so the world can be watching here from Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. Enjoy the show. Right. Well, welcome folks to the Slant Village here at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. So happy that you guys are able to join us here this evening. My name is Matt Shenendorf. I'm the Director of Interpretation here at the State Park, and we'll enjoy a lovely evening of Native American flute music here this evening. We are live streaming this on our Facebook page, so don't want to do anything out of the ordinary. Everyone sit still. One of the first times we've ever done this is live streaming this through our Facebook page. So we are being joined right now with people from around the country enjoying this program right here at the Council Lodge here at the Slant Village. A little bit about myself as we get started here. My ancestry, I'm an enrolled member up at the Fort Berthold Reservation, also known as the Three Affiliated Tribes. My ancestry background goes back to the Mandans and Hidatsas. Mandans known for living right here at the Slant Village. And the Hidatsas also living along the Missouri River during the time period that Slant would have been occupied, but farther north. But also with the Urushlages, same type of lifestyle that the Mandans had. I'm also a little bit of Oneida from the Wisconsin area as well. That's where the name Shenendorf comes from, in the Wisconsin area. So that's a little bit about my heritage. I grew up essentially right here at the state park. Grew up here in Mandan. Spent many of my youthful years, I'm still young, right? Youthful years out here at the park, visiting, enjoying the Slant Village and all the history that the park here has to offer. A lot of what I learned about the history of the Mandan did not just come from the books that I read and the historical accounts I read, but a lot of it came from my grandmother. Her name was Eagle Woman. And you can actually read a little bit about her in the lodge next to us. I don't know if some of you have checked that out. You might have saw that little panel there. And she was a Mandan storyteller, knew many of the stories of the Mandan people. Grew up at Fort Berthold, was raised by her grandmother, and really knew the essence of the Mandan people. And so I learned a lot from her about that. I did not learn how to play the flute, though, from her. Picked up the flute. It was given to me. This one right here was my first flute, given to me by a friend here at the state park, and I learned to kind of play on my own and work with some of the more renowned flute players across North Dakota. And yeah, and that brings us to today, right here at the Slant Village, for another evening in the Slant. So I'm going to start off my program with my first flute song. It's called Eagle Dreams. It's one that I start all my programs off with. It's dedicated to my grandmother. As I said, her name was Eagle Woman. Her dream was that people, generations, would understand and learn about the Mandan heritage and the Mandan culture. So tonight I'm going to play some songs for you that represent kind of life in these villages. And that's really important to understanding the Mandan culture, because their culture revolved around the day-to-day life right here on the Slant. And so their stories, the history, the music that they played, all talked about what life was like in these villages. And they used that to pass on to the next generations so that they also would remember what life was like in these villages here. And so going back to growing up and listening to the story that my grandmother would tell about the life here at Honest Land and these villages that were home to the Mandans. These villages were really big. I mean, Honest Land here, for those of you folks that don't know, Honest Land was a smaller village. It had just about 86 earth lodges that once existed here, and a population of about 1,500 people. And this was one of several villages that were occupied by the Mandan along the Missouri and Heart Rivers. Historians estimate their populations could have been anywhere from 12 to maybe 15,000 people at their height living along this river. So that's a lot of people that you have living here in these villages. And for the Mandans, their life revolved around farming the floodplains of the Heart and Missouri River, making sure they had that food source, all that agricultural products, the corn, the beans, the squash, the things that were so sacred to them to survive on for the winter months. And so you have to imagine these gardens had to be massive gardens that they were tending to along the floodplains of the Missouri River and the Heart River. And so my grandmother always talked about how the women would sing songs to their plants. So today, it was a balmy 90 degrees out here, gorgeous day, but you have to imagine you probably weren't down in the gardens in the heat of the day tending to those crops and weeding your plants. No, the women went out in the early morning hours, even before the sun rose, to tend to their crops. So in the afternoon of the day, they were watching over their crops. They were watching over the corn, the beans, the squash. And they were tending to that, and they were singing to their crops, helping their spirits to grow. My grandmother always played music for our household plants. I always thought it was weird. I said, well, the spirit of that plant needs to grow. And so that too, that music that she was playing for those plants, she felt it was helping the spirit of that household plant. And so these women, thousands of women singing along the floodplains of the Heart and the Missouri River. You have to imagine that. You have to imagine walking into this area and you could hear all of those voices resonating through the valley. It would have been quite the sight. Not sight, quite the sound to hear those voices resonating amongst the gardens. So this next song here is called Watching the Corn. tell there's a delay in the live feed. All right. So, yeah, so these women were tending to these crops, and some of you are probably asking yourself, well, what did the men do? You know, they were probably sitting in chairs in the earth lodge, lounging because it was so hot outside. No, they were out defending the village, hunting the large bison. You know, the bison that we have today, the ones we see in our zoos, they're like half the size of the bison that the Mandan were hunting back then. These were massive animals. Massive animals. And so it was a dangerous job to go out and hunt. It was a dangerous job to leave the village, in fact. So you had to be a strong warrior to do that. And so it was unfortunate, though. Many men perished doing these jobs in these villages. But when the men returned from a great hunt, it was always a celebration coming back. It was always a celebration, bringing that meat back to the village, that life source, so that the Mandan could dry the meat, put it on their scaffold, store it for the winter months. It was a celebration. I mean, we take it for granted these days. We can go to the grocery store, we can buy food, but do you ever celebrate when you get home, when you bring home that pound of meat and set it on the counter and let it thaw out? No, I don't do a dance or anything. But back in the day, that was what they did, because a hunt was important. You had to go out and get that food. You had to work for it, bring it back to the village to supply your family, make sure your children had food to survive after the winter months. So this next song here is called After the Hunt. In these villages, as time went on, the Mandan referred to this area as the heart of the world. And it really was when you get down to the thinking along with the Mandans, thought when they lived here on the Slant. They didn't have the concept that we have today of what our world is. Our world is the entire world. But for the Mandans, their world consisted of these two rivers, the Hart and the Missouri, joining right here. And they lived in this village for over 200 years. So many, many generations of people lived and died right here in this village, and this was their world. Well, their world would drastically change as time went on. So in the 1780s, smallpox epidemic broke out among these villages. And so the Mandans had to leave. They had to abandon their villages, abandon on the Slant. It's the only way of survival, only way of surviving that epidemic. But my grandmother would always talk about smallpox as it affected not only the people died from the disease, but it also affected the culture. Because for the Mandans, their culture was passed on orally. The Mandans didn't have books, they didn't have writings, manuscripts, that they were writing down their history and their culture. They were passing it on through stories that were being told to the upcoming generations. And so when an elder would pass away in these villages, a lot of knowledge, a lot of information would pass on with those folks. My grandmother would always talk about when an elder passed away that she knew. She'd always tell me that a lot of good knowledge passed on with her that we'll never know her. And she oftentimes referred to it as a set of encyclopedias burning up, but I know most of us, we use those. No, you know, it would be using our smartphones and yet can't get a signal. You ask Google or Siri that question, and there's no response. You know, we rely on information from our devices, from the internet, everything we have, but do we rely on information from our elders that are passed on? And that's how these villages were formed. That's how that history continued on. So when elders passed on, it was a sad moment because folks knew a lot of information, a lot of history of this village went with them. So this next song here is called A Grandparent's Farewell. So when disease struck these villages, for the Mandans, their concept of disease, they didn't understand a sickness, a virus like we know today, like we understand today. And so for a virus for them was looked at as an evil spirit had come upon the village. And so many times their elders or their warriors would get together and sing powerful songs. And these songs were typically sung around a drum. And those songs were very powerful medicine to ward off these evil spirits, to protect the village, to pray for the people in the village. So this next song here is called The Singers. And it's a warrior song, and you're going to hear those singers singing together as they pray for the village. So as these Mandan abandoned these villages, they had to leave their home behinds. And when we do tours out here in the village, we often talk about the way the Mandans migrated up the Missouri River. We talk about how they left these villages, they moved north, formed new villages, things like that. But we don't really touch on the emotional side of things, of having to leave a village behind. And when I think about it, when I think about this village here, and it was occupied for 200 years, you have to imagine there was a lot of ties to this village that these people had living here. Not only multiple generations of people that came and went, lived and died here in the village, but also the memories of those people, the memories of the families, generations of families. And you had to pick up, leave all of that behind, and move north into a territory that was unknown, a new life, a new beginning of the village life for these people. And so you have to imagine there were a lot of tears that were shed, a lot of tears that were cried by women, children as they left these villages. Even warriors might have cried. And that's what brings me to the flute here. The flute was a warrior's instrument. And like everything, it was an outlet for a warrior to express emotion. And so a warrior had not a collection of flutes that they traveled around with, but they had one flute that they made and had by their side. It was a part of their person. The songs they played with was a reflection of who they were inside and what they were feeling. And so this next song here is called the Death of the Village. You know, hear those cries of those people as they moved out of this area. before we get farther into the Mandan tradition, we talked about how the Mandan had stories on how things came to be. Everything was passed on through stories. So the history of the Mandan people was started with the use of creation stories. So these creation stories, these stories told how everything came to be within the Mandan culture. And these stories were so important. So these stories were consistently passed on to generation to generation to generation as a way of remembering the start of the Mandan people. And, excuse me, like everything, the flute itself had its own creation story, its story of how it came to be as part of the Mandan and the part of their world. Most likely, flutes were a trade item that were traded around, and these stories would have been traded with them. So it's no telling if this story originated with the Mandan, or if it was also passed on as they received flutes and other things from neighboring tribes as trade took place. So this story, as I've been told it, about the creation of the flute, starts out with a young warrior. This young warrior, he set out to find food for his family. So he was tracking the game along the riverbed. And as nightfall came, it became dark in this forested area. When this warrior, he got turned around as nightfall fell in this area, and these large cottonwood trees blocked his way of seeing the stars, finding his way back to his village. So he decided the best thing to do was to bed down for the night. This warrior, he bedded down, he found a sturdy old cottonwood tree, sat down beside it on the ground, and there he sat. And he listened. He listened to the sounds that came out at night. We've all heard those sounds. We've sat in our backyards. We've all been camping. We hear those sounds, the birds, the night owls that come out, the insects that start to make music in the trees. And as the branches and leaves of these giant cottonwood trees rustle in the breeze, you hear that echo through these riverbeds. So this warrior was listening to those sounds. As he was listening to those sounds, he began to drift off into sleep. But something awoke him, a sound he had never heard before. Never heard before. It was a ghostly, eerie sound, and it echoed through this forested area. It sent chills through the spine, the back of that warrior. He'd never heard this ghostly sound before. Well, that warrior fell asleep, and that sound continued to echo through this forested area. Well, in a dream that warrior had, a red-headed woodpecker came to this warrior, talked to this warrior, spoke to this warrior. He said, "Follow me, follow me, follow me." Repeated that to him. Well, when the warrior woke the next morning, he began to gather up his belongings. Started to find his way back to his village. He didn't get very far, and he spotted this bird on the trees ahead of him. It was very familiar. He realized it was the bird from his dream. It was that red-headed woodpecker. And that bird kind of stared back at that warrior as if he knew him. Well, that bird flew off the branch, and that warrior followed that bird as fast as he could through this forest area, dodging trees and branches. And that woodpecker led the warrior out to this open clearing. And standing all alone in this clearing was this old tree. And as that warrior approached this tree, he noticed it was a cedar tree. It was a sacred cedar tree, sacred to his people. And as he got closer, that woodpecker was perched on the top branches of that tree. And as he moved, circling this tree, the light began to glisten through these branches on top of this tree. So he climbed the tree and he took a branch off. And he sat there and he looked at this branch, and that woodpecker had pecked holes in this hollow branch they had taken from the tree. Well, as he was admiring this branch from the tree, a gust of wind whipped across this clearing. And all those branches on top of that tree began to sing that same sound he'd heard the night before. So that warrior, amazed by this, took that branch back to his village. And he sat in his lodge. And he fiddled with that branch, tried to get that same sound. Nothing. Nothing. Couldn't get a sound. He became frustrated. So he traveled to a hilltopped area near the village. And there he prayed to the Great Spirit on how to make that sound. The Creator, he said, show me the way of making that sound. That wonderful, ghostly sound he had heard. Well, on the third night of his journey there, this red-headed woodpecker arrived, perched in front of him. And he changed in the form of a man. It was the Creator. And in the man's hands, he held a branch from that cedar tree. And he began to carve away at that branch with bone tools, showing that warrior how to make his first flute. He told the warrior to go out into the surrounding nature, find his inspiration for his song to be played on this new instrument. So that warrior did that. He made his first flute. He went out into the surroundings. He went down to that river where he had first gotten lost and learned his first flute song. And he went back to the village. He gathered everyone around in the plaza. And he took out this instrument that he had made, showed the people of the village this new instrument. And there he played his first song for them. He played that song for them, and everyone was amazed. Everyone was amazed by this song he had heard, this music, this instrument, this ghostly, eerie sound, something they've never heard before. And he could have kept that to himself, but he decided that that story needed to be passed on. It needed to be passed on to other warriors in the village, other flute makers, to make those songs and continue this tradition through the people of the Mandan. And so he gathered other warriors, young men in the village. He gave them each a branch from that tree. And as the man had shown him, the Creator had shown him, he showed them how to make their instruments, their flute. Told them to go out into the surroundings, find their inspiration for their music. So that's how the story of the flute goes as a creation story for the Mandan. Like I said, this story is very similar. I've heard it told from other tribal groups. The same story of the bird that comes into play. And as you can tell, the flute oftentimes mimics the bird. Different types of birds play a role in these stories. But on an archaeological standpoint and a historical standpoint, flutes, again, like a trade item, probably came around this area around 900 AD. And they would have probably started as eagle bone whistles and eventually progressed into wooden flutes that would have been played by the men of the village. Today, though, flutes are played by men and women, native and non-native, as a way of new age of music, as well as a way of expressing emotion and other feelings that we have. So flute has a lot of powerful emotional medicine in it as well. So that's the story of how the flute came to be. Now, the flute also has, as I've been told many times, or asked many times, is whether or not I know a traditional native love song on the flute. Well, I don't. So, and that kind of came around as as a more like out of Hollywood. You know, this image of this warrior standing on a hill playing his flute, and his bride-to-be comes out to see him. Instant love connection. Well, I did not win my wife over playing the flute. That did not happen. But a flute player that I had worked with told me a story of an Indian love song, which I absolutely love. And this story, again, talks about this warrior. And as I talked about how the Mandans and warriors would use the flute to express emotion, this warrior wanted to express love for a woman in the village. And so he was enamored with this woman that walked to and from the gardens. He would watch her day in, day out. Today we call that stalking. But back then it wasn't. It was okay. It was okay to watch the woman that you liked walking back and forth from the village. It was a good thing because you knew that she could provide for a family. So this warrior decided that he was going to play a song on his flute for her, win her over, win her heart. So he learned this song, special, special song. He waited for the special night to play this song. It was a night like tonight, perfect outside, summer night, crisp, the moon shining, and it was the dead of night in this village. And this warrior snuck out and he got to the lodge of this woman that he fancied. And so he sat outside the lodge and he played his song for her. And he listened. He heard nothing. So he decided, well, I must have to play my song louder. She probably didn't hear inside the lodge. So he played it a little louder. Listened. Still nothing. So he decided one more time. He gave it one more time to play this song. As if she has to hear it. And if she is hearing it and she doesn't want to come out, then he knows her answer. So he finished the song, and he listened, and he heard a rustle. He heard a sound. Someone was moving in the lodge. And then he stood away from the doorway, and he looked in, and there was a shadow coming out through the lodge entrance. And he thought, this is the moment. This is the moment. She heard his song. He was going to proclaim his love for her, and she stepped out of the lodge. So this figure moved out in the moonlight, and this warrior, even before looking, he progressed to, said his love to this woman, told her everything. The woman stepped in the moonlight, and it was the woman's grandmother that had come out, seeing what the racket was. So that taught me right away that I wasn't going to play a love song for any woman. But that was a song that was told me by another flute player, and I always enjoy that song when I get asked about Indian love songs and if they work on the flute. But it's all about emotion for these warriors, these men of the village. It was about emotion, how they expressed it, and they expressed it through this wooden instrument, how they did that. So stories like that, the creation story of the flute, stories about love songs, these songs were passed on from generation to generation to generation, and that's why versions of those songs are still around today. It's because the Mandans were expert storytellers. These native people that lived along the Missouri River, they were experts on telling stories and passing on history. Not only history about the people, but history about the culture, the information about the culture, how to build an earth lodge like this, how to garden massive gardens along the floodplains. And so as we talked about the Mandan leaving this area and smallpox affecting them, and this journey, not only physically but emotionally and historically, that these Mandan people went on, in the end, they're still around today. Myself being here today, prime example of the Mandan still being around, the culture still being around. So this next song that I'm going to play is called The Rebirth of a Nation, because for the Mandan, they've always been here along the Missouri River. They've always been here at the Slant village. Their spirits have been here. And their spirits will continue to be here as long as the sun rises and sets daily. And so, with all the tragedy that struck them over time, their history continues to be passed on through these stories. So that's why I think this song's perfect, is this rebirth of a nation, because they're still doing that today. And our program here tonight, this village being here, is a prime example of the Mandan culture being passed on through upcoming generations. And we're using our technology to pass it on to the world as well. So this next song is called The Rebirth of a Nation. last song I always say for the end, and it's called A Warrior's Spirit. And I think that's the conclusion on the story of the Mandans. It's about the spirit of the people. And for the Mandans, I think the ultimate goal of passing on this history, the stories of their people, was to ultimately remember the ancestors, their ancestors that have come before them. And little do we know, we all do that today. We all do that by telling stories of our parents, our grandparents, living or gone. We tell those stories, and ultimately we're remembering their spirit, their story that they played, or the role they played in the story of your life, our lives, the lives of these people that lived here. And so this last song, and it's perfect for this village, is because, like I said, the Mandan, the spirits of the Mandan people still exist here in this village. You can come out here on a crisp morning all by yourself, and you can feel that essence of those spirits, those people still here. You can come out here in the evening as the sun is setting, see the shadows amongst the earth lodges here, and you can envision those people watching that same sun setting. And so that spirit remains. And as long as the stories of the Mandans, the history of the Mandan, the history of the native people that lived along the Heart Missouri River, continue to be told, continue to be passed on, there will always be Mandan among us. There always will be Mandan that call this village, Honest Land Village, that they call this village home. And that's what's the key to their existence, and their lifestyle, and how they live, and how their stories, their history is so important to them. So like I said, this last song's called Warrior Spirit. You're going to hear obviously the flute in there, you're going to hear the drums, you're going to hear the bells, and the chimes of those dancers that are around there. You're going to hear all that, those spirits that still exist. Not thunder. It's not storming outside. I want to thank you for coming out and joining us here at North Dakota State Parks at Fort Abraham Lincoln. It's great to see all of you guys out here enjoying the parks. I hope you all enjoyed the program. I hope you learned something about the Mandan people. I hope it brings you back here with more people to come and visit the Slant Village, Fort Abraham Lincoln, take in all the history here at Fort Abraham Lincoln State Park. But again, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. It was great having you here today. It's a beautiful evening out there. The bridge lights are on. This is the one time out of the year, one of our rangers told me this, that those lights ever get turned on that bridge. So enjoy them. It's the one time of the year that we ever use them, because other than that, it's always light. And then it's winter time, and no one comes out here in the winter, right? But yes, enjoy the village. We have a couple lodges open for you to check out. You can check out the lodge next door. As I said, got a little write-up about my grandmother in there. You can read about her and her work out here. But spend some time out here, learn the village, and enjoy your evening. So thank you for joining us this evening. It was great having you.